Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 37th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, coming to you again with Mr. Scott Schara from Our Amazing Grace. My name is SG Anon. In this process and in this journey, it's very important, I think, to keep a pulse on the events and the kinetic activities that Patriots are doing to drive the system of essentially what amounts to societal level bureaucratic enslavement back against the wall and to highlight and expose it. But it's also important, I think, to in that process, bring out the fullness of the web, the fullness of the picture, and how the different junctions and levers and fulcrums of the system, that we're all up against, what we would call the deep state monster, the deep state matrix, or the control matrix. How it all operates and where, in each of our localities, the important actionable points are to look and to focus. Mr. Schara has been heavily involved in doing just exactly that. I'm very glad to have him back to the show today, and I hope each of you out there will enjoy our discussion. Mr. Schara, thank you for coming back.
Well, thanks for having me again. I appreciate it very much.
So in this process, I'd like to get started first, if I could, with the updates on the legal process that you and your team has been pursuing with regards to justice for your late daughter, and many prayers and blessings towards you in that regard, of course, as always. And thank you for what you're doing in the fight. Patriots out there, I think, are really very interested in the legal aspect because it provides a basis for public record and discovery, which is sort of a categorical, irrefutable level of exposure, and it helps spurn the awakening process. So let's start there if we could, and then I know that you also have some other projects and some other highlights you'd like to get into later. But if we could, let's start with an update on the legal process.
So that's an interesting piece of the equation because as I have entered into this process, we've just to give a little bit of history, we filed the lawsuit on April 11th of 2023. The all the defendants that we filed against not only Ascension Hospital but 5 doctors and 2 nurses who were directly involved with Grace's murder. It's a civil trial. It's not a murder trial. It's in state court. But the trial has the opportunity to open up a path for a lot of different people because we have 5 claims. We have, of course, a wrongful death, medical malpractice. Those are obvious. But we have a declaratory judgment for the illegal do not resuscitate order. Then we have a medical battery for lack of informed consent. That's a very interesting one because that led to a 5th claim, which is a common law battery claim, and that is likely the most important claim because it gets outside of the statutes. The statutes are really designed against us. We don't realize that. I mean, intuitively we think, well, we can have our day in court, we got the truth on our side. But it is a lie that has been set up for decades before COVID. COVID got me into this. Grace's murder got me into this. But I mean, I would have never guessed that what I would find is an elaborate scheme, and the legal system is part of that. Yeah, and I know you want me to get to the update on the lawsuit, but I just want to frame it so that people can understand how diabolical this is. So when I say this, so the medical battery claim for lack of informed consent, this is huge. In fact, on January 22nd, our Congress just implemented under the Cures Act, not the CARES Act. The Cures Act was put in place, I think, in 2016. And on January 22nd, they eliminated informed consent under the discretion of the doctors. So just think through that. Informed consent is a benchmark in care. And SG, if you were a doctor and you had a patient, you'd have a dialogue with the patient. Informed consent was written in the Bible. Treat your neighbor as yourself. God didn't need man to implement informed consent. So you just treat the person the way you'd want to be treated so that they can make an intelligent decision for their health care. But they're legislating away informed consent. And in our lawsuit, we found that specifically because the original claim for medical battery for lack of informed consent was in our pleadings. But then when we got to the motions to dismiss, the defense, the first round of motions to dismiss, the defense said, well, lack of informed consent is not a battery. It is medical malpractice because of precedent. So precedent is one of the first diversions in really getting justice, because all this case law becomes the equivalent of law. So in Wisconsin, the um, the lack of informed consent, putting it under medical malpractice, means there's statutory limits. There's a 3-year statute of limitations to file. There's statutory limits on damages, and all of the defendants' attorneys' fees are paid by their mandated insurance for medical malpractice. So that's why we developed this common law claim for medical battery that survived a couple of motions to dismiss on October 30th. And now we're into discovery. So we've already done the interrogatories, the document requests, and we have approximately 30 depositions scheduled for January. So that'll be big news once we get through the depositions. We're going to video record all of them. The legal team lets me speak out. They don't hold back at anything, but they did warn me relative to some of the video that we're going to get, that I don't give away our position when I share the video on the air. But I do want to then say 2 more things relative to the case. And one is specific about what we're explaining. The legal team, it's pretty neat. You know, we went on the offensive in our defense of the October 30th motions to dismiss. And here's what we wrote in our brief in opposition. We wrote, defendants want this court to rule that a patient with Down syndrome can be intentionally restrained, intentionally deprived of advocacy, and intentionally administered deadly sedatives, all without consent. And these actions are simple negligence. So assuming battery under medical negligence in such a way would make hospitals walled gardens where any intentional misconduct would be treated as simple negligence. Indeed, defendants envision a world where there is no common law claim for the failure of a healthcare provider to obtain consent that falls outside of medical malpractice. In this world, an unethical or financially motivated physician may administer deadly drugs without consent for malign purposes, including making room for new patients. So you can see we went on the offensive with that statement. I'm thankful for that, because now it's public record. A number of the things that are in our motions or our briefs and oppositions are in the public record, and it's fantastic. I encourage all attorneys to copy our common law defense complaint that is on Grace's website, ouramazinggrace.net, so you can copy and paste it. Then last, by way of introduction to the lawsuit, is this whole idea of the legal system. You know, if you read our state constitution, and it follows similarly in all the constitutions, that Congress shall make no ex post facto law. That means no law that takes away our rights. Well, my daughter Grace and all of the 1.2 million Americans who were murdered during COVID in hospitals to set up the bioweapon, their rights were taken away. And their rights were taken away by statutes that were put in place well before COVID. COVID just exposed this for me. And the informed consent statute is really a plain one to see that. In the informed consent statute, which, remember, I said we don't even need a statute because God already defined informed consent in the Bible. But if you look at the informed consent statute, it reads logically, but it was set up for one purpose. And it was set up because what happens if the doctor violates informed consent? Well, their attitude is not under the rule of law. Their attitude is sue me. And the related statute is the enforcement statute. So if a doctor violates informed consent, your claim can only be to the medical examining board, and their decision is final, no appeal rights. The medical examining board is made up of 10 doctors and 3 lay people. So, you know, it's like a traffic cop pulling over his buddy and giving him a ticket. It's not going to happen. They don't go against their own. So that kind of gives you some insight as to this battle we're fighting. You know, I'm thankful to be in it. I'm thankful that God is in us, but we are in the Antichrist legal system. That's my summary statement.
Well, I would say that statement sort of tracks with the various levels of exposure that are now happening, especially around the event of the COVID-19 protocols, the various hospital homicide protocols that were implemented and intentionally deployed and incentivized. And we have evidence to show, including financial reconciliations, press releases, et cetera, that this was a coordinated profiteering campaign on behalf of the medical murder complex worldwide. And I would say that the legal bureaucratic lawfare complex would essentially be an encampment, a fortress that one would have to have possession and control of in order to wage something like a medical murder campaign and think that one could actually get away with it. And on that particular note, we had spoken a little bit, prior to coming on today, that the nodes and the junctions go very deep and very vast, that there's an intentionality to all of this that rings true in how, as you said a moment ago, and how the statutes are designed, right, to enable not just this event, but any event of the same flavor. And many people out there have called COVID-19 a first trial run. They've called it, an experiment to see how this particular system, how such a global tyranny grab would actually transpire, what sorts of resistances, of course, they would have to encounter. And the basis that we have on this program, of course, is that they did not factor in the level of awakening that has now occurred worldwide simultaneously amongst patriots, which itself, I think, became or is in real time the Achilles heel to that tyrannical agenda. So without sort of waxing much longer here and boring the audience, do you care to highlight for us the various things that you have discovered in this process that sort of add substance to what was just said? Or if I've gotten anything incorrect, please do correct me.
Well, the thing, I don't think you have it incorrect, but it's the words you used want me to expand on it. So, and I hear this a lot in the alternative media that COVID was a trial run. I don't think COVID was a trial run at all. The trial run was standards of care, and it's fairly easily proven. And the reason is because of the research I've done. If you go back into the early 80s is when standards of care were developed. And I'll tell you a quick anecdotal story that got me into this, digging into standards of care. I learned I had heart disease 7 years ago, and we had conventional medical insurance at the time. The nurse for the doctor who was recommending that I take the statin, I started researching. I didn't want to go on any drugs, and I consequently did not go on the statin after about 300 hours into heart disease research. And the nurse pulled me aside and said, "Scott, I want to tell you something you're not going to want to hear." I said, "What is it?" She said, "You have to go on the statin." I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "We have to get our entire patient population to follow the CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, standards of care." I said, "Well, I'm not on Medicare and Medicaid." She said, "It doesn't matter. They rate the standards of care for the whole country. And our reimbursement rates," and I've drilled this down. I don't have the document here for us today, but I have found the documents that show the reimbursement rates of the entire allopathic system, whether it's an independent doctor, but if they accept Medicare and Medicaid, all of the system is designed that the reimbursement rates that they receive are based on their entire patient populations following the standards of care. And this is how the vaccine agenda got unrolled on our society, and every agenda. So the standards of care written by CMS are what got COVID to be able to be pulled off. And I'll give you another pointed example that virtually everybody would be familiar with, that is not an anecdotal story. SG, if you had an ailment and you went in to see your doctor and he said, "Let's do a biopsy just to check to see if you've got cancer." So you do a biopsy and then you go back in to see the white coat assassin, and he says to you, "Yeah, you have cancer, and I can schedule what?" So now you think about, what is he programmed to schedule? He only has 3 choices in his quiver. He can either cut, radiate, or chemo. Those are the only 3 choices. Those are the 3 standards of care. The only legitimate one of those 3 is cutting, and that presumes it's the right type of cancer and you caught it early enough. 90% of cancers have been cured. but that doctor cannot recommend any alternative treatment if his desire is to keep his license or get paid. He only can follow these standards of care. And the standards of care for cancer are designed to hasten your death, and hastening death is murder.
May I stop you for a moment?
Yes.
I just want to, because you've just said something that I think is very important, and I don't want it to be lost on any of our listeners out there. You just highlighted that government regulated standards of care from bureaucratic agencies are sort of the half of a 1-2 punch of bribery and manipulation against the medical practitioner, because the other side of that punch is the financial incentive behind these particular modalities of care, correct?
Exactly right.
Okay, so I'm sorry,
And,
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to
and this
highlight
is
that for the audience so that that was not lost, because this is a private public co-opting of our healthcare system.
correct. When we shake our finger at the Canadians because they have government healthcare, well, we're the ones who started government healthcare. It's just we hide it. So these standards of care have been in place for 40 years. That's how COVID was set up. So that's why I say COVID was not a trial run. And it's even deeper than that. So now think about that's from the doctor's side. Think about from the patient side. The patient's programmed to, once he gets over the shock that he's got cancer, then he asks, well, how long do I have, doctor? Right. So he's already assuming death. But then the next question is, when the doctor wants to schedule his chemo appointment for the following week, I mean, they got to do this urgently, right? He's got cancer. Then he says, well, does my insurance cover it? And you can you can just picture the doctor putting his arm around the patients and, well, of course your insurance covers it. Why does your insurance cover it? Well, because they're in on it. And as I was telling you right before we got on the show, we haven't had conventional allopathic medical insurance for 4 or 5 years. We went under Christian healthcare ministries. I'm thinking because we haven't had any claim, so I just thought, well, I mean, we're programmed that we need this safety net. Okay, so we get it. So now it was about 2 months ago, I received my Social Security statement in the mail. And because I'm going to share how Medicare and Medicaid is directly involved in this in just a minute, but I already knew because of my research into Medicare that I'll be 61 next month. And so I just wanted to look at it because I'm doing research. And I knew I wasn't going to sign up for Medicare at 65. So I started looking into Medicare, and what a shock. If you don't sign up for Medicare, they penalize you. I mean, it falls into the category, you can't make this up. Shouldn't they pay us to not take Medicare because then we're not a drain on the system? But they force you into taking this. So I thought, well, I don't have to do this. I've got Christian Healthcare Ministry. So I emailed my agent. I said, what happens when I turn 65? I don't sign up for Medicare. Am I covered under Christian Healthcare Ministries? He shoots me back their policy manual, and he clips out the paragraph on whatever page it was, and it specifically calls out that if I don't sign up for Medicare, they don't cover it either. So I thought, well, are they in on this too? So I dug into what kind of coverage do I even have now? And strangely, I'm going to just quote from this because it's almost more shocking than what you can believe. It says in their policy manual, this is for my current coverage, which we're dropping, by the way, because I found out I was due. It says Christian healthcare ministries cannot share bills for non-standard procedures and treatment plans, including blood work or testing supporting such treatment. This includes treatment plans that follow an alternative, integrative, complementary, functional, holistic, or naturopathic approach. To be considered for sharing, treatment must follow a conventional approach and meet the medical standard of care for the condition submitted.
Remarkable.
Isn't that blow your mind? Yeah. So I'm trying to get this word out that they are all in on this. Everybody's in on this. I found out what motivated me to reach out to you to get on the program again. I'm actually way beyond that research now, but what I was sharing was the things like the coroner doesn't even want to, they won't even meet with me to look at Grace's death certificate. The doctor who murdered Grace is the one who signed the death certificate. And they said, well, our legal counsel doesn't want me to meet with you. I said, bring your whole legal counsel. I don't care. I have nothing to hide. You just would not meet. The district attorney wrote in their response to, I hired a separate attorney to get involved with the district attorney, and they write back, again, you can't make this up. They write back, well, Dr. Shokar, which is the one who murdered Grace, didn't cause Grace to get COVID. Well, no kidding. That's not what I'm claiming. I mean, it's like, it drives you nuts to see how everybody has been bought. I know you probably have another question now, which you can do, and then I want to get into Medicare and Medicaid and how they pulled this off through that system.
Actually, my friend, I'm sort of tracking along on this end, and I was going to save my questions until we got to a point later in the segment, because I think this is really important. You're talking about coordination, and coordination is something that, depending on how it's framed in a court of law or a common law court of justice, coordination provides, I think, a layer of evidence basis, a layer of understanding to any sort of evidence-based discussion that highlights context and is very, very important to achieve an appreciation of what actually happened. So, by all means, please.
Oh, thank you. Well, you're right. This coordination thing, it's not something I can talk about from a legal perspective right now, because we're working on something way bigger than Grace's lawsuit. But eventually, I'll be talking about that too. But from a legal perspective, but from a research perspective, I can talk freely about it right now. And so think through this: Medicare and Medicaid. What's the goal? What's the stated goal versus the real goal? Well, the stated goal of Medicare and Medicaid is to take care of the disabled. Medicare is to take care of the elderly. So it sounds altruistic. Well, neither of these programs were in existence in 1960. All right, in 67 was the first public document that I found through research from the Rockefellers, which was the depopulation agenda for America. Okay, so now Medicare and Medicaid get set up to take care of supposedly the elderly and the disabled. Well, now out of the 300 million plus population in the United States, there's 135 million Americans on these two programs. They account for 50%. The expenses related to those people, Medicare, Medicaid, and the related Social Security, amounts to $3 trillion a year, 50% of the federal budget. So now they come up with this idea, which, I mean, this has been going on for a long time too, and this is where you can see it's coordinated, the idea of collectivism. They have trained our society to believe that we need to look out for the good of the population versus the good of the individual. That's where standards of care fit also, the good of the population versus the good of the individual. So now we have a government that we have a fiat currency. They're not accountable to anybody. The budget will never be balanced again, because that's not the goal. That's another psyop to get us thinking about, well, we got to balance the budget. So we got to do something about Medicare, Medicaid. It's out of control. I'm sure you saw last week, the Republicans are thinking about moving the Social Security date back from age 65 to 67, because we got to balance this budget. I mean, that's insanity beyond insanity. So I have a slide here I'm going to read from this research. And I wrote, think this through. Medicare and Medicaid is the ultimate bait and switch. We payroll deduct so that we can have, quote, free healthcare, end quote, when we retire. Remember, we paid for this privilege our entire life, but it is wrapped up in a bow, looking like our government is taking care of the elderly and the disabled. Then they program us to bow down to the doctor, and they license the doctor so he can't be paid unless he follows the Center for Medicaid Services standards of care designed to hasten our death. So Medicare and Medicaid, the public reason it was set up was to take care of the elderly and the disabled. The real reason it was set up was to hasten the death of the elderly and disabled, and to get as many people under this program as possible so that they submit willingly to hastening their death because they've got free medical insurance. But this is so big, I can't tell enough people about it. But yeah, very few want to wake up to it, as you well know. And it goes deeper than this. So do you have another question now, or do you want me to go deeper?
Please continue.
All right. So how did they set this up? We're going to eventually get back to what, the deepest level possible, but how they set this up. So how did they set up a culture of death like I'm describing? Well, they set it up. Hannah Arendt, who studied the Adolf Eichmann trial resulting from World War II. She had a hard time, just like me, wrapping her head around this until she coined the phrase banality of evil. So banality means commonplace. Evil is so common that we can't recognize it. So she coins this phrase, and I studied what she was talking about. I thought, oh my gosh, the same thing is happening here in the United States of America. So what does it look like? We're going to just take the two population groups that I'm focusing on, the elderly and the disabled. But believe me, they're coming for you next. All of us are part of this because of the bigger picture population reduction agenda, which I'll close with. So think through Grace. My daughter Grace had Down syndrome. 90% of Down syndrome babies are murdered in the womb today. In the United States, 90%. When Grace was born on September 22nd of 2002, we had never done any of the testing. She comes out, I was in the delivery room, and she had Down syndrome features. And so I just said to my wife, I said, I think she has Down syndrome. And the doctors, they have a huddle, they come back after, I don't know, a half hour or so, maybe an hour. And they come in the room and they ask Cindy, my wife, and I, do you want to keep her? And what are you talking about? Of course we want to keep her. And they said, well, we have people waiting in the wings for children such as these. So I don't know if they're talking about adoption, sex trafficking. I have no idea what they were talking about, but they did presume that we wouldn't want to have somebody with a disability in our family. Well, let me tell you, Grace was the best thing God ever gave us next to salvation. She changed our lives, and she changed it for the good. I'm in this fight because of my daughter Grace. I don't, it doesn't mean I wouldn't have done it for one of our other kids, but Grace was special. They took one of God's when they took Grace. So this culture, how did they do it? What does it look like? Well, here's how it looks. Standards of care again come into place, because the young couple gets pregnant, they go in and see the doctor, and the doctor says, congratulations, you're pregnant. Let's set up your amniocentesis. Again, they only care, does my insurance cover it? Well, of course your insurance covers it. So now the amniocentesis comes back and the doctor says, well, we believe your son is going to have Down syndrome. I recommend an abortion because these are all the complications with Down syndrome. And they have a whole bunch of lies relative to the complications with Down syndrome. That's a whole nother slide that I have. And the couple, without any roots, just believes the white coat because that's what they're trained to do, and they schedule their abortion. So that's how they pulled it off with the disabled. And it's more than just Down syndrome, of course. So they're trying to eliminate the disabled from our culture. All right, so now let's go to the elderly. Well, when I was a kid, I don't know how old you are, SG, but I'll be 61. And when I was a kid, virtually everybody took care of their parents. The idea of a nursing home would have been, extremely rare. Nursing homes didn't come on the scene until the 60s and 70s. And so what was the reason? I mean, it was part of what your responsibility was as a human being, to take care of your parents. Well, now what happens? I remember this vividly with my grandma. My mom had already passed away. So the family, she was one of 13. So I kind of was a proxy for my mom with the rest of the family. So they called me and said, they want to put grandma in a dementia center. I said, well, we'll take care of her. And they wouldn't let us do that. So they'd ship her off to a dementia center. What's the reason? Well, because she misses the mail one day. She's giving her money away to a bunch of charities that they don't agree with. And I said to the family member who called me, I said, whose money is it, hers or yours? It's her right to give it away. So if she does, if that's what she wants to do, that's her business. And shipping her off to a dementia center is not the answer. Interesting side note with grandma. So now she's in the dementia center. We went and visited her just about every week, and we always took her out. So we would go out to dinner, and she would have a glass of wine, and I got yelled at by one of the other family members. You shouldn't be giving grandma wine. I said, she's 88 years old. If she wants a glass of wine, what's the problem? Anyway, grandma was so sharp. I usually had a couple beers with a meal, and I said, Graham, I'm going to have a couple extra beers today because they're giving away a Leiningen-Kugel's solid wood canoe, and based on you get a ticket for every beer you drink. And she quips back to me, how many canoes have you won so far? And of course, I did not have 4 beers that day, then, which was the wise thing to do. So that's how sharp grandma was, but they ship her off to a dementia center. And these older people, they have something to teach us. That's why they want them in these nursing homes, out of sight, out of mind. So anyway, that's the banality of evil. So now we go to another level deep, and we get to the nasty word eugenics. And eugenics is the cause of what I just explained. So eugenics, people don't realize how deep the eugenics program is. And I'm not talking about eugenics has been around since about 300 BC. But in modern times, the United States started the eugenics movement in the early 1900s. Even Hitler, this is a quote from Hitler, SG. He said, I have studied with great interest, he told a fellow Nazi, the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would, in all probability, be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. So we develop it as a country. Hitler adopts it. Then, of course, Hitler gets caught with this program, and we shake our finger at Hitler all the while we're taking the 1,600 top German eugenicists back to the United States to take eugenics even further. And eugenics became standards of care, became COVID. All these things are part of the agenda, the current agenda that we started in the early 1900s. So now we go to the highest level that I know, which is the satanic agenda. The people who are the minions implementing the satanic agenda, they're simply implementing their beliefs. So if you're convinced, all of us operate on beliefs. So our beliefs motivates our thoughts, which motivate our actions. So they have been convinced at the highest levels that we have too many people on the planet and we don't have enough resources. So consequently, we have this foolishness of population reduction and climate control that has infiltrated our society. And when you start going up the layers to the mystery religions, the Illuminati, and all the people that are controlling this red pill, white pill matrix that we live in called the world, we only see what they are feeding us. And I'll go off on a tangent on that in just a little bit, but we start operating in this world and they feed us exoteric, not esoteric agenda items. So then we start participating in this agenda that they want to sell us. And the example I want to give is relative to vaccinations. And I'll go on that right now, unless you want to stop for a question.
Well, the only question I think I have at this point is, and this sort of ties me back in a very personal way to my own awakening process, is that we are all participants, whether knowingly or not, whether willingly or not, in a large scale ritualistic evil against all mankind.
That's right. That's spot on. I mean, and until your eyes are awake to this spiritual agenda, none of this really makes sense. And you end up participating in less evil without realizing you're participating in it. And the example I'll give you is relative to the vaccine psyop. So vaccinations have been started in the 1800s. There's been warnings against vaccinations from credible doctors in the 1800s, the 1900s, obviously the 2000s. Nobody wants to listen. And now we get to the point where the debate, I mean, you can't, in the alternative media, you can't get out of the COVID. And so then what they do, so then we know COVID was evil, but then what they do is they lay less evil solutions like amnesty, restitution. We need to legislate. I personally believe Pfizer may even become a sacrifice in this whole thing just to keep the agenda going. So then we end up seeing these less evil tactics that they are using, and we look at them as good. Well, only God is good. God is outside of these evil versus less evil dialectics that Satan has laid. And I'm going to give a very pointed example to show what I'm talking about, because it impacts every single person, and it's a real example that's going on right now. And what it got exposed during COVID was mandates. Remember, mandates have been in place for a long time. It was subtle before COVID. COVID, it became right in our face. Mandating the jab, employers mandating the jab, the government mandating the jab, people getting paid to take the jab, all kinds of crazy things. So then what I saw on the Vaxxed bus for the Vaxxed movie, it has a subline that says, where there is risk, there must be choice. So the opposite of mandates is choice, right? All right, so first, just hold on to that thought for a minute, because I'm going to come back to it with an exclamation point. So first of all, just think of the programming relative to vaccinations. So first of all, we have, quote, viruses, end quote, that promote fear, which isn't reinforced by propaganda. I'm putting viruses in quotes because I haven't drilled this down enough yet, but there's enough things that I've seen that, of course, we know that the COVID virus was not even real. In fact, they created a lab leak. So then the less evil is we'll have safer labs next time, because they've created this psyop that we've got to do, we got to get these viruses at higher levels so that we can plan for virus X or whatever possible thing could come down the pike, as if God didn't have this all in his repertoire ahead of time. So now we have viruses that just can come out of thin air at any time, and the propaganda reinforces those viruses. And I know you're familiar with the Smith-Mundt Act. Well, that was modified, repealed, whatever you want to call it, in 2012, because this satanic agenda, the rules that they follow it's called tacit approval. So they have all this stuff that is exposed to us in the public, but we're not paying attention. We're lazy. So the repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act made propaganda against the United States citizens by its own government legal. You can't make this stuff up. All right, so that's the first. So now you think, okay, well, we've got all this propaganda. All right, well, Grace was never vaccinated with anything. So what's the reason? Well, we homeschooled. And so we learned early on that vaccinations are not part of how God's a necessary evil for how God made our bodies. All right, so that's the first bullet point, with that we really don't have a choice. Okay, well, what's the next one? Well, the medical system, as I referenced earlier, is programmed to follow orders. Those are called standards of care, and we're programmed to obey the white coat. Again, another story relative to Grace. When she was going in for her well visits, one of the doctors, he asked me, I was with Cindy and Grace, he said, is Grace vaccinated? I said, no. And he started explaining, and I said, well, we're not going to get her vaccinated. So we come in for the next one, and he says to me, have you changed your mind about vaccinations? I said, no, have you? And we could agree to disagree. That was the old school. That's 20 years ago. The new school doesn't happen anymore. All right, so then the next bullet point before I get into my exclamation point is, we have, by design, when I was a kid, 95% of moms stayed home to take care of their kids. Now 95% of moms work. So then what happens? The public pool system is where you drop off your kids so that they get free babysitting service while both parents can work. Well, the public pool system requires the child to have 80 vaccinations now just to participate in this system, to program his brain in ways that you wouldn't want it to be programmed. All right, so I'm just framing this, do we really have a choice? So most people would say, well, I don't have a choice. Look at all these things. All right, well, now we set up this idea that I started the discussion with, is where there is risk, there must be choice. Okay, so then we have on the evil side mandates, the less evil side choice. Why do I say less evil? Because remember, God's way is always outside of evil versus less evil. You can't even see that we shouldn't be taking vaccines because we're in the dialectic now. If you buy into this, where there is risk, there must be choice, you just agreed to participate in the satanic dialectic of vaccinations. All right, so I have one more thing yet, to set up a much bigger picture, if that's okay.
Absolutely, by all means.
All right, I'm running out of air here. I drank my water dry already. But so how long has this been going on? And the answer is, it started in the garden in Genesis 3:6. That's when Satan started to use his deceptive ways, and he convinced Eve that she should take the fruit that was forbidden for the pursuit of knowledge. And that knowledge was to replace God. So God is not against knowledge. Hosea 4:6 says, my people perish for lack of knowledge, but he's against knowledge being an idol. So that opened up to our sinful nature this business of pursuing knowledge instead of God, to take care of us. And I'm in the medical murder lane, as you know. I think it happens to be the most important lane because of Revelation 18:23. And in Revelation 18:23, God tells us that America will deceive all the nations by its pharmakia. And that started in Genesis 3:6. It continued in the Old Testament. King Asa was a good king, but in Second Chronicles 16:12, it says, in his 39th year of his reign, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians. So he sought the doctor first instead of God first. And just so I don't forget, I want to make sure that, this is why I keep speaking out. I lost my daughter Grace because I trusted the doctors first. I had to repent of that sin. And what actually happened specifically is, I was not awake at the time. I was just a dad. I own a business. I'm just doing my thing as a patriotic dad sucked into the American dream who owns a business. So I'm not in that American dream anymore. I realized that's a psyop also. And what I had bought specifically into was the propaganda, the hospital murders. I don't want my daughter to die of COVID. And so we had, all the vitamins, ivermectin, but we also bought a pulse ox, and I started measuring Grace's oxygen saturation with my wife. And we followed the alternative doctor path, which said if that oxygen number drops below 94%, admit yourself to the hospital. Ultimately, that was because I let fear influence my critical thinking, which God gave me. I didn't rely on God first. And I keep speaking out because God is the only answer to this. COVID was a call to repentance. We got to this point because of rejecting God, and consequently, the only way out of it is repentance. Okay, so now we go down further, and in Jesus's time, in Mark 5:27, we have the passage that says, she suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So this pattern was there when Jesus was walking around. We're going to blow all the money on doctors and you're not going to get better. What's the reason? They weren't codified standards of care then, but it's the same thing. The doctors know better than God. Well, now we get to our modern time. And as you know, the Carnegies published they hired the Flexner report to be done, published it. The Rockefellers fund it. That report was designed to throw all alternative medicine under the bus, natural paths, osteopaths, chiropractors, anything that was not the allopathic medicine system was thrown under the bus. And as we go through, and that's what I've really been explaining, the outgrowth of the Flexner report in this whole conversation, because it ultimately becomes standards of care, Medicare, Medicaid, licensing of the physicians, high prices so people can't afford to have medical care without health insurance, and everybody's been paid off because there is no accountability. Since we went off the gold standard on April 5th of 1933, it is a license to print money. So everybody can be paid off. The goal, hasten death. So then, as I shared last time I was on, I wrote an entire series, a 7-part series called Medical Murder by Design. And it is truly by design, and they're all in on it. And don't think you're off the hook once you're wise to allopathic medicine, because the opposite can be a trap also. If you think that you're going to reverse your aging by following the non-allopathic approach, I'm not discouraging that, but one of the things I shared today in my monocast that I recorded this morning is these big pharmaceuticals like Pfizer, they own most of the supplement companies. Again, you can't make this stuff up. So anyway, my message loud and clear is repent. We cannot get out of this mess by not relying on God.
I want to say thank you for an extremely thorough overview, because that was a qualifying, I think, and very detailed deep dive on not only the machinations of the system, but the longevity of the system as well. And one of the things I took away from, your discussion there just a moment ago is that we have never truly had health care in the world, certainly not in a way that amplifies the symbiotic balance between God, human being, and nature. And so on that particular topic, Mr. Schara, as we close out today, it occurred to me that there would be no one more qualified, I think, if we were to be honest with ourselves, than a father who has lost a child at the hands of a corrupt and imbalanced system. Without respect to the mechanisms of change, which of course are moving now in the world that we live, what does the remedy, what does the reverse system, what does the true health care and health amplification system look like in the future?
Well, I wish I knew that. What I know is that there's two aspects to anything that we can do, and those two aspects are physical and spiritual. And I also know that there's two mistakes that you can make once you are awake to this stuff. And number one is failure to prepare. And I want to talk about that with the physical. And then number two is relying on your preparations. We rely on the finished work of Jesus Christ. That's the only thing that we can rely on. He is the rock, and he is truly the only thing that we know has not been put in place to deceive us. So as far as the physical, and you might remember from the first time I was on, I referenced Genesis 50:20, because I see that as our family's calling. And what that scripture says is, for what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives, which is happening today. And my daughter Grace lost her life, specifically, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I'm waking up to many of the reasons, but she died to wake me up. And God has given me a platform to share what that means. So, the physical piece of it is fairly obvious, but maybe not obvious to anybody looking at it for the first time. But if you think through, if the entire allopathic medicine system is designed to hasten death, that means you have to be prepared. So what does that look like? I mean, I certainly encourage anybody listening to drop their health insurance. So you think, oh my gosh, I dropped my health insurance. Well, think it through. All of a sudden, if you don't have that safety net, you have to use your critical thinking. And the first time I had experience with that is when Grace was born. We had allopathic medical insurance, but we didn't have baby coverage. So when my wife got pregnant, we had no coverage. So we sat down with the doctor, and I said, what is this whole thing going to cost? All these visits, ultrasound, hospital stay. And it was a woman doctor. She said about $10,000. I said, what if I pay right now? And so she said, well, you have to meet with the business manager. So I sat down with the business manager, and I wrote a check for $4,000 that day, and it covered everything. So I received a 60% discount. So that just starts the wake up process. So you don't have to have medical insurance to cover these things. Because most of the stuff you wouldn't do anyway. So we never did the amniocentesis. We never did any of the stuff that they want to sell you as part of your medical insurance. All right, so then let's get down to a little bit more specific, because a hospital stay, how do you survive a hospital stay knowing what I just told you? Well, on Grace's main website, we have a hospital rescue tab that has power of attorney link, medical directives link. I mean, you've got to get your forms in place, but there's never been a document that ever saved a person. You've got to have an advocate who is awake with you in a hospital stay that demands informed consent. And that starts from the moment you walk in. You don't sign the fake screen with the fake pen. You insist on a printout. You cross off an initial every single thing that takes away your rights and gives rights to the hospital and the doctor. You demand informed consent. You are hiring the hospital and the doctor to take care of you. If they don't take care of you, you fire them, get another doctor within that hospital. If the next doctor doesn't follow the script, you get out of that hospital. Those are all your rights. But you can't, these rights, they're not trying to make sure that you know what your rights are. You need to take care of knowing what your rights are before you get in the hospital. Then make sure that all the medical directives that you have relative to your health are on your chart, your electronic chart. You get all the passwords, so your advocate has live access to your chart. Because remember, with Grace, one of the reasons we have a declaratory judgment for the illegal DNR with Grace is the Department of Safety and Professional Services, which is the licensing board in Wisconsin to protect us, said that doctors can put unilateral DNRs on people in a hospital without their permission. And so, I mean, you've got to have access to your chart live so you're paying attention to what's going on. Don't do anything that you haven't researched. Don't blindly trust the white coat. So that's the preparation part. And then, the spiritual preparation is, I don't know that there's ever been a more important time to get right with God. I mean, I think that we are in the days of Noah, and that's a whole nother podcast, but it's huge to get to know who God is and start relying on him. There's so many deceptions, not just for the unbelievers, but for the believers. I mean, we've got the whole Israel crisis is a major deception. I'm going to be recording a monocast on that tomorrow. God will be true to anybody who has submitted to him. He will be the one that protects us. You're asking about alternative, you ultimately started this question asking about an alternative medical system. I don't know what that looks like. I don't, at this point, I don't necessarily trust anybody starting an alternative medical system unless I know what they believe, because there's a whole bunch of people who are chasing money right now, and it really becomes the less evil side. And I'll give you a great example: ivermectin. I don't have anything bad to say about ivermectin, but you remember, it's still a pharmaceutical. It's still less evil. And a doctor friend of mine sent me the SDS on ivermectin that was changed in April of 2023. Well, why would a drug that's been working fine for 60 years, why would they have to change the SDS? And why would it be changed in April of 2023? Anything can be compromised. And I would not be shocked if the ivermectin supply was compromised on purpose to get the people who are awake. I mean, you get the drift.
Indeed, I do, my friend. It's a spiritual battle. And at the end of the day, if we're going to design a system that properly balances this world and our relationship to our creator and this world, we're going to have to, I think, go through a spiritual purging process, if we will, or a refinement process is maybe a better way to put it. And I would have to say that it looks very much like we may be in that process in these days. You said something along the lines of the days of Noah. I've often made reference to Red Sea moments on this program. It is absolutely biblical. It is a historic moment for human history. Mr. Schara, I very much appreciate you coming back to our show today. If there's anything that I've left unsaid, please by all means feel free to close us out.
I think that you did a fine job. I covered everything that I wanted to cover today. I will very much look forward to coming on again as I get to the next level of research and the lawsuit progresses further. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my friend. It's a pleasure. And for those out there, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion today. I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot. This is SG Anon. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.